Right, welcome everyone to our Bicep community call of July 2023. We stopped sharing the slide with our team members because the team is just growing so much. And we're really proud of our team growing so much, but couldn't fit it all on one slide. So we'll be skipping that from now on. But what is the community call for? I know that you guys have heard this so many times, but again, it's for you, not us. We're going to be sharing a lot of topics and a lot of demos that we otherwise wouldn't cover in our own calls, our quarterly calls, which it used to be. And it's a more casual connection with our community. So you'll be able to use the chat, talk to our team directly, and our team is always in the chat, always answering questions, and you can also raise your hand and speak with our team directly and ask any questions. So we could get started on the O.20 release. There's not too much on the slide, but these are some pretty big things. Our user-defined types or custom types GA. So we're removing the experimental flag, and it's finally GA'd, which is really exciting. And I know that a lot of people have been waiting for this one for a little bit, so we're excited to announce this. Compile time custom imports. This is something that Johnny has been working on, and he'll give a quick demo on this in the call. But basically, compile time imports will allow you to use types from one template to another without having to copy and paste the definition. But like I said, Johnny will demo this in a little bit. Deployment Pane UI, this is experimental, and this is also something that Anthony will cover in this call in a little bit as well. Future releases, nothing too much has changed from last time. Private networking for deployment scripts, keep pushing this back, sorry about that, as well as the MS. Oh. Okay. Also the MS Graph provider, this is something that we've also been working on and trying to get out as soon as possible, but we're trying to make sure that it's as quality as we can. So it will be pushed out again, but it will be done by mid-September. So it will be out in the beginning of October. And support for Get Secret and Bicep Param, that's something that we've been working on pretty diligently, but should be out, if not this month, next month. All right, Stephen, are you here? Don't see Stephen on this call, so we could come back to this. Emily, are you ready?
Yes, I am. Hi, Stephanie. Hi, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Yeah, so if you want to share your screen and maybe give a quick, brief intro.
Or just join the call and share it. Yeah.
Yes, definitely. So to give a brief intro, hi, everybody. I am a fellow PM on the Bicep tool. And over the summer, we've been starting to explore Bicep testing and validation frameworks. And so how you might natively test or validate your Bicep code. And we have two core goals with this, or two core areas that we're hoping to learn more about, is how we can increase customer confidence when developing Bicep code and deploying Bicep code, and how we can save customers time when deploying Bicep code, particularly facing errors that you wouldn't find out until 5 or 10 minutes into a deployment, but you would preferably be able to identify before beginning the deployment process, like mistakes in naming conventions, for example. So I have a short demo to share with all of you, and then a question that I'll be posing at the end of the demo, which I can present now just to get your wheels turning, is we're hoping to find out what benefits you could see from leveraging either of the testing frameworks that I'll be sharing with you today. And if you have any questions or suggestions as I go along, please feel free to drop them in the chat or just raise your hand, and we can get you unmuted. We're very much in the exploratory stage. Oh, sorry, is someone trying to
get out? We don't care.
Oh, sorry about that. We're still very much in the exploratory stages, so looking for any feedback. And this is a summer intern project, so very open to suggestions and might not see it in production anytime soon, but just looking to gather insight on the space. So I'm going to share my screen, just connecting here. And I'm going to request to share. Great, and you should all see a Visual Studio window up on the screen. If anybody's having trouble seeing it, just let us know in the chat. Okay, great, I see thumbs up. So as I mentioned before, the goal of this project is to see how—
Oh, sorry, Emily. Can you make it a little, can you zoom in a little bit?
You can do Control plus within VS Code.
Yes. How's that?
I think that works. Christian, is that okay? Okay, perfect.
Awesome. So this demo will use something called asserts or assertion, which is a common testing framework where you're able to provide an expected value and compare that to the actual output value of your code. And you would be looking to assert or validate that those two are the Boolean statement of whether they're equal to each other or one contains a substring, for example, is true or successful. So first, I'll share our first framework, which uses this assert keyword directly in line with the Bicep file. And here you can see a simple example defining an app service app resource. It might depend on other resources, but for the sake of this, we'll just stick to looking at the app service app resource. So we define our assert keyword, notifying that this will be an assert statement. Then we name our assertion, something like name or app name prod. And so in this case, we see here that the naming convention for this app service app relies on the environment parameter. And we might want to confirm that we are in the production environment and that our app is correctly named to reference that. So we would define our assert as app name prod, and then we would create a Boolean statement where referencing the app service app resource. So we do app service app.name and have access to that property of the app service app. And then we would use equals equals to confirm that that would be equal to prod solution app. Looking at the naming convention and knowing that we would expect prod to be as the parameter passed into the environment. So in this case, you would then deploy this Bicep file, and the assert statement on line 17 would run in advance of deployment and validate as either successful or failed. If the assert is successful, the deployment would continue as expected, and if the assert was failed, the deployment would halt before completing. So this is where we started off with testing. I welcome your feedback in the chat at this point if you have immediate thoughts around that question I posed before of how you think this might be beneficial or useful in your workflow with this process in mind. And now, or also if you have suggestions on syntax, or you see this not adding to your workflow, but you have a suggestion of a tweak that could make it useful for you. And now, as you're giving feedback on this one, I'll move into the second framework that we started exploring, working off of line 17, assert statement here, using a more traditional unit test framework. So in framework 2, you can imagine that we would, that this assert line no longer exists in our main Bicep file, so I'll comment it out for clarity. And instead, your tests or assertion statements would live in their own test.bicep file, which takes the format of a more traditional unit testing framework, if you're familiar with unit testing. So in this case, I have 2 tests defined, but for simplicity, I'll comment one out for now, and we can focus on lines 1 through 6, which is now utilizing the new exploratory test keyword to define the test. Then we name the test, in this case, test main, and we provide the file to which this test should point. So in this case, the main.bicep file that we were just looking at, test main points to main.bicep. Then within this test block, you pass in the parameters that would represent the same parameters you would pass into the file in your regular workflow. So in this case, we've hard-coded them to be the prod environment and the West US2 location, but you might imagine actually just passing in your parameter file directly in here to make that connection more aligned with your workflow so you don't have to repeat parameters. And so using this test framework, we're able to write the same assert, but have it live in a test file, which would be able to be executed separate from deploying your main.bicep file. So in this case, you could run test.bicep in the terminal before ever deploying your bicep file into Azure and assert some simple parameter reliant features of your code or conditions of your code. So here we can write a very similar assert statement to test the naming to validate the naming convention. App name. And here we now set this main service app name assertion to be equal to the Boolean, or to we define it to be the Boolean statement app service app name dot, or pardon me, app service app dot name. But how we now reference the app service app dot name parameter is by referencing the test main that we've written above, which inherently points to the main.bicep file. Then we can access the resources in the main.bicep file by doing .resources, then .app service app to refer to that resource and its name to get its name parameter. Then we can confirm that we would expect it to be prod.solution app based on the naming convention before that was the environment variable -solution app, looking at the environment parameter that we're passing in on line 3. Another test example that you might make use of is asserting that the location of the app service app would contain the substring US if you wanted to guarantee that this app service app was deployed to the West into a US location. You could say contains, then reference test main.resources.app service app.location, and then confirm that it contains the substring US. And then, as I mentioned before, this file would be run prior to deployment, and then you would get an output in your terminal that would list how many of the assertions were successful and to which test block they referred to. So that's the end of the demo for today. To repeat the question that I would really appreciate some feedback on is any examples or scenarios where you would find this useful in your workflow, or more generally than that, just simply, could you see yourself making use of this? If so, what would it provide you? Perhaps saving time on your workflow, perhaps being able to better maintain your parameter names, or maybe the validation is not something that you've thought of before in Bicep, and just whether you'd be interested in learning more about this line of thought. If this idea really is appealing to you and you'd like to find out more, we're actively running some customer research on this and doing customer calls to gain your feedback and insight. And so please just let us know in the chat if you'd like to be notified or included in any of the research going forward. Thank you, everybody, for your time.
Do we have the survey, the form link is that in the chat?
Yeah, so thanks for mentioning that, Alex. I'll drop the link in the chat to fill out a survey, to just list your email and some basic information, and then we can follow up that way.
Perfect.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Emily. All right, I'm going to take over screen sharing again. And Anthony, are you ready to demo?
Yeah, let me share my screen.
Okay, perfect.
Can you see my screen okay?
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, so yeah, this is basically a new experimental UI feature that's going to be available in VS Code in the next release. It's So it's not going to be available by default, but there is a setting that you can enable to actually try it out. It's not like, there are some kind of missing pieces, for example, being able to deploy to different scopes. So, see this as something experimental that we're trying to get feedback on, but it is something that you will be able to use. So we have this new button up here next to the visualizer, this like cloud icon. If you have a Bicep file open, or if you have a Bicep RAM file open, and you have the setting enabled, you should have this icon appear, and you can hit it to bring up this deployment pane. So what this gives me is the ability to kind of work with my file on the left-hand side and like validate, deploy, what if, kind of run those things quickly without having to leave the editor. So just to kind of show you what the flow looks like, I'll pick a deployment scope. So this is going to be a resource group in this case. And by the way, feel free to stop me if you have any questions as I'm going through this. So we have the option to like either put parameters in here and test them, or pick a parameters file. So here I'm going to load an existing parameters file, which I have checked in my repo. And I can hit validate. And that's going to make a request to Azure. That's going to run the regular like /validate API and give me the result here. And obviously, if there are any errors, it's going to show me errors here as well. So yeah, I mean, the idea here is that it's very quick for you to make a change, iterate on it, see if it has any errors, fix the errors, and kind of like shorten that cycle of having to work on a change and validate it. So just to show some of the other things you can do with the UI, once you've loaded your parameters file, you can also hit edit, and you can actually just modify things. So like, let's make a change to that parameter. We can hit deploy. This is going to actually deploy the file, so it takes a little bit longer. And so we're expecting to give us a greeting output. So this is the output. So you can also kind of use this to, test out expressions, evaluate expressions, get slightly more of an insight into like what the deployment engine is doing. I think is a possible use case for it. Any questions at this point? Okay, I will just quickly show you what the Bicep param flow looks like. It's a little bit different. Here we have a Bicep param file. This is linked to my main file. Here I'm doing a little bit more. We're actually deploying a storage account and just kind of taking in some parameters just to demonstrate like what happens when you change them. So again, the same button shows up for Bicep param files. I have to associate it with a scope. And in this case, I decided to not allow you to edit the parameters on the right-hand side. The thinking is that, you have your file open here, you can make changes on the left-hand side and you can validate on the right-hand side. So to start with, like we're trying to deploy to Antarctica, which obviously isn't a real Azure region. So let's see what happens. We can try and validate our file. So we get back from the pre-flight API, location not available, provider location Antarctica isn't available because it's not a real Azure region. So I can kind of quickly fix that out. Try validate again. This time we have a different error. This is actually coming back from the storage provider. So now they're telling me that I'm trying to deploy a storage account with a hyphen in it. So again, I can kind of like fix my change, hit validate again, and now all good this time. So I can actually go and deploy this file. So let's hit deploy. Might take a little bit of time just because I haven't actually deployed this storage account before, but I pick storage accounts because they're generally pretty fast. Actually, what I didn't show you was that the kind of operations view you have here is going to update in real time. So if you have a complex deployment, it's going to be a bit like the portal UI, where you can kind of see what's going on in real time with all the different resources you're deploying. Okay, so that's deployed our storage account. The other thing I wanted to just show quickly was being able to run what if as well through this UI. So we can try making a change to the parameter. We're going to change the access tier, and let's see what if shows us this time. If we get that. Okay, yeah, so here it's basically kind of summarizing in a table the result from the WATF API. We can see that there's a modification. The path is this properties.access tier, and we're making a modification to it. It's a little rough around the edges in a few places. I'm not like a UI expert myself, so things like this resource ID showing up like this, I think these are, there are a bunch of kind of UI improvements we can make down the line. But for me, I just was interested in getting something out there and just starting to collect feedback on it. So that's the core of the functionality to show. I will just quickly show you how to enable it as well. So in the next release, if you search for Bicep settings, you should have this experimental deploy pane feature and show up in your settings view. So if you tick this box, you should get the icon. If I untick it, the icon's gone. If I tick it, the icon should come back, and now you can use it. So yeah, that's all I had to show. If there are no questions, we can move on.
I think there were some questions. Will deployment pane UI support deployment stacks?
I don't see why it couldn't. It doesn't today, but with deployment stacks coming into public preview, it would make sense for us to support stacks in the future. I think all of this feedback, as people kind of play around with this and evaluate it, feel free to put all of this feedback into GitHub issues.
Will the extension work in dev containers, code spaces, etc.?
That's a very good question. I have not tested it in dev containers. I can't think of a reason why it wouldn't work in dev containers, but I also don't want to say it's definitely going to work in dev containers. So try it out. But technically, I can't think of a reason why it wouldn't work, as long as you're signed into your Azure subscription.
I think those are all the questions that I saw. Is there anything I'm missing?
Cool.
Okay, cool. Thanks, Anthony. Let me reshare. All right, Jason and Dan, not sure who was going to present this, but MS Graph Extensibility.
Hey, Stephanie. I'm going to present this. Give me a second here.
Sure.
Can folks see the screen?
Yeah, we can see it.
Perfect. So first of all, thank you to Stephanie and the rest of the Bicep team who have worked on the Bicep extensibility framework. I'm Dan Kershaw. I'm a product manager working in the Microsoft Graph team, and hopefully Jason, Eric, and Adam are here. We're all from the Microsoft Graph team, and we want to take advantage of this great extension framework to start opening up some of the identity resources as part of infrastructure as code capabilities that you get with Bicep. So the reason we're here is we've heard this loud and clear. ARM and Bicep templates provide a great mechanism for deploying Azure infrastructure, but when it comes to the identity pieces, it's sorely lacking, and that provides a lot of pain for our customers. So we have a demo, and I'm afraid to say that we can't do a live demo for you. With what we have at the moment is only available in pre-production, and there's some issue with the authentication service in the pre-production environment. However, luckily, Jason did capture a video, and I've just realized that I'm going to have to reshare because I didn't share audio. So give me a second here. Sorry about this. Okay, so take it away, Jason. Okay, a couple of things I wanted to point out on the demo, and again, thank you very much, Jason, for recording that. So for group owners and members, that is an additive change. So you can add up to 20 owners or members in one statement, and it will add any new owners or members that it sees in the request. It won't overwrite the existing members or owners. So I just wanted to point out that it's a non-destructive operation. Before I move on, did anyone have any questions on the demo? Okay, I guess not. I will move on then. So
there is one question I see. Will consent also work through this deployment mechanism?
yes. So you will need to grant the. I will come to it in a little bit later, but it will use the standard consent mechanisms. Here it's going to use in our first private preview the user on behalf of Flow. So the application that is doing the deployment will need to be consented for the permissions to deploy the various resources that you need deployed through Microsoft Graph. So in this case, you would have had to have permissions on application, service principal, and groups and group membership to deploy this particular Bicep template. Will it be able to expose API or grant to other scopes? Yes, so the API will allow you to create an application and expose API scopes on an application. So yes, that's possible, and you will also be able to grant permissions. So we will be exposing the OAuth 2 permission grant and app role assignment capabilities or resources as part of our upcoming private preview. So yes, grant. Whether you'd call it granting consent or assigning permissions to, or granting permissions to the application, those will be supported. Okay, let me move on. So I won't spend any time on this. We're just taking advantage of this great extensibility capability, so that when ARM sees a particular resource and identifies it as something that's Microsoft Graph, it will call out into our Microsoft Graph extensibility provider, and that will result in that provider making calls out to Microsoft Graph into resources like Azure AD. But in time, that could be for any resource in Microsoft Graph, and not just Azure AD. In terms of our roadmap, we're hoping, as Stephanie was saying, to have our private preview mid-September. Teams working hard to try and hit that date, or maybe bring that in a little bit earlier. We're looking to have a refresh in November, and then shooting for public preview in May. In terms of what's in the private preview, so we have a small set of types that we will be exposing for private preview, again, including those OAuth 2 permission grants and app role assignments. We will only provide the types for Microsoft Graph Beta, and deployments will require a signed-in user. So we don't have any zero-touch deployment capability in this particular release, and we'll only support the public cloud. I've got a link here for signing up for the private preview. I will also put that in the chat here as well. So if you are interested, please go ahead and sign up for that. In terms of a private preview refresh, in the private preview refresh, we will be supporting zero-touch deployments. So no signed-in user would be required there. It will still be only public cloud, and we'll have Bicep types for both beta and V1. And we will add more resources. And while we've got a set date for the public preview refresh, what our hope is that we will be able to include new Bicep types automatically as API support is added in places that can support this framework. So as soon as we do that, then we can automatically create new Bicep types and release those. So adding new Bicep types will come more incrementally. And it'd be great to hear from folks if you just wanted to put stuff in the chat window. What are the Microsoft Graph resources that are really important for your scenarios? So, we went after the things that we'd heard were fairly key in this first private preview, but definitely want to hear more about other resources that are important to you. And that's all I have. Any other questions?
Dan, I think there's a problem with the permissions on the form.
Oh,
for
really?
Signing up.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so the
Thanks.
chat, there's comments in the chat. I think there are more questions in the chat as well.
Okay. Trying to see all the chat questions here. Sorry, the link in the slide worked, but the one in the chat doesn't.
The one in the chat works for me.
Yeah.
Can someone else double check?
You're within Microsoft.
That's true.
I want to make
That's true.
I want to make sure it works for folks outside of Microsoft.
Someone responded that the link in the chat works.
Yeah, I just opened like an incognito browser and it still worked, so I think you're good.
Okay, great. I was pretty sure I clicked on the right button that said open it up for everyone. So, okay, I'm trying to see if there are questions here.
There's one about service principals for GitHub OIDC access.
Yes. So is that federated identity credentials support? I'm trying to. I may have to come back to you on that. Yeah.
And
So if.
Go ahead.
Sorry, someone was trying to say something.
There was another comment about B2C as well. That's what I was just gonna bring that up, but I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Oh, no worries. If the GitHub repo OIDC access is through federated identity credentials, yes, that's definitely something that we'll be doing. In terms of when you say B2C in the future, we are working pretty closely with the recent Entra External ID public preview. So we're working with that team to figure out what are the additional APIs we want to make available that would enable scenarios where you could automatically deploy a SIAM tenant. Let's see if there's anything else. Okay, I think I've addressed any questions, but let's see. Okay, I think that's everything. That's everything I have. If you're interested, we'd love to have folks participate in the private preview. So please fill out the form. It's just a few short questions on who you are, and then we can reach out to you and get a few more details to make sure that you're ready for the private preview. Thanks very much, and thank you, Stephanie, for this opportunity.
Thanks, Dan. We really appreciate this. All right, let me go back. Yeah, this is something that we wanted to start a conversation with you guys on. The inline parameters or supplemental parameters is something that a lot of you guys have been asking for a little bit. And what we did was we had a lot of investigation on it and realized that it's a lot more complicated than we originally thought. So we wanted to talk to you guys about having an alternative way of using your use cases and also ask what use cases you have for using inline or supplemental parameters. So let me share my screen really quickly. Okay, let me know if this is big enough for you all. Hopefully it is. But yeah, so we wanted to share 2 use cases and get your thoughts on whether or not this is sufficient for an alternative to inline parameters. So the first use case is being able to pass non-secret and secret values that are only available at deploy time. So we have an existing key vault here and a secret that will be generated at deploy time. What we can do with this is use environment variables. So that's one option, and I will share here. Environment variable, it'll be my secret. I'll make it very important secret. And then what we could do is just deploy it from here. And that would allow us to the read environment variable will allow us to pass the value generated at deploy time. We're wondering if this is sufficient for your use case of using inline parameters, and will be able to be a good use case scenario. We just want to get your thoughts and your feedback on whether or not this is a good enough alternative instead of using the inline parameters. That's one use case. And I'll keep this running while I'll explain the second use case. The second use case.
Sorry, Stephanie, can we
yeah.
pause before the second use case just to make
Sure,
sure we
sure.
get that feedback?
Sure.
For those that have requested, or if you haven't requested it but want it, the ability to pass extra parameters on the command line beyond what's specified in Bicep params, does this environment variable method feel sufficient, or do you think it's too finicky or it's not good enough versus what we would get with passing parameters on the command line?
And feel free to raise your hand and take yourself off mute as well.
Essentially, if we don't get a strong response that this is like not good enough for some reason, we're probably going to punt the ability to pass parameters on the command line. So this is a good opportunity to have your voice heard if you feel differently. Jan, it's a huge step forward what we have today or what we would enable with passing parameters on the command line. Jan, if we didn't have passing parameters on the command line, would anything be problematic? Is what Stephanie walked through good enough? And this could be for passing secrets or not for secrets. It would be the same method. You would create an environment variable that's not a secret and pass it in using the same read environment variable method. Brett, the use case is basically there were, I guess, a meaningful number of users who didn't pass all their parameters in the JSON parameters file. And when they were doing the deployment, they would essentially grab whatever was on the parameters file, add a couple of parameters on the command line, whether it's with secret value or something else that wasn't represented in that parameters file. And we don't have that same functionality if you switch to Bicep params, and you have to fall back on this alternative of environment variables. Is this secure? Stan, is what secure? Is using environment variables secure?
Yeah, I mean, if you use it from your computer, it doesn't sound much secure because you can basically forget to wipe out these variables. If it's in a CI/CD pipeline, it's okay because those will be wiped out after the deployment anyway.
So your worry is that you would create a secret in your local machine's environment variables, and that could be problematic?
Yeah, because even if if someone has a way that reaches your computer without having administratively privileges, they're gonna have access to these variables in a plain text.
It also for persistent self-hosted agents. If Microsoft hosted agents obviously would clear that, but
I guess maybe I don't know enough, but I would assume that environment variables are used for secrets in lots of other contexts and in general day-to-day app development. I would assume these challenges have been overcome in some capacity, but maybe our understanding is wrong.
Okay, yeah, maybe, yeah, I don't know.
Okay.
Just to add context to that, I kind of use a mashup of both, even with the parameters JSON for doing multi-stage pipelines to deploy multiple environments in one pipeline. That a lot of parameters are passed on the command line. So I'm not sure the environment variables would be much more user-friendly in that scenario. I can provide examples if it gives you more context.
Yeah, I think any examples for helping us understand this would be helpful. I think ideally we would like to provide both, and people can just pick whatever option they want. As we've started implementing it, we've come across a number of challenges that are making it difficult, and that's why we just want to make sure that it's really, really needed before investing in it.
So the use case that I have in mind is an integration feature, right? So you have a service catalog like ServiceNow or something, and you have a form and action that kicks off a Bicep template deployment via GitHub Actions. I don't want to have to write a parameters file, store it somewhere, go and get it. I want to just be able to pass the parameters in as inputs to the GitHub Actions and keep them in memory as opposed to writing out to a file.
But you can still do all command line parameters, right? If you don't use a parameters file.
Yeah, the issue is mixing the two together. So you could mark in your description, if you didn't want to use Bicep params at all, you would be able to do what you described.
Here's a talk. Sorry, did I break up there? Did I get? Hello?
What was that, Brett? Sorry.
I was saying we often resort to having a param file or a YAML file, which is then tokenized as part of the pipeline to solve that solution if you need to be more dynamic with sort of ephemeral environments or parameters that are dynamically created as part of an environment deployment. So being able to do both would help with that or reduce the amount of tokenization we have to do as part of that. I can provide examples again if any of what I just said makes absolutely no sense.
Maybe what we can do is I'll just put a message in here saying thumbs up this message if you feel you need to pass inline parameters with a Bicep param file. And if you thumbs up that, we just know that you're in that list and we can follow up with you if we have any more questions. Okay. Thanks, Stephanie, for letting me interrupt that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for driving this discussion. I think we really do want to get all of you guys' feedback and thoughts on this in order to move forward on what decisions to make. Okay, I'm going to move forward on the second use case, which would be overriding values to reuse the same params file across different environments. So this is something that we haven't implemented yet and something that we will implement soon, but we wanted to get your thoughts on if it's sufficient for your use case. So what we have here are a couple of params: environment, application DNS name, key vault name, all things that you guys would use in a global params file. And if you wanted to change a value, we would have a local param file, something like region, you might change per deployment. So we would have an import function that will import the global param file into the local param file and then override this. So this would be hierarchical params, and this one would override anything in the previous file that is imported. And yeah, we wanted to get your feedback on if this would be able to be sufficient for your specific use case in this case. Yeah.
And again, this one would be, and the alternative way of doing this would be if we did support inline parameters, you could override on the command line. But what we're suggesting is that this is a more robust way of doing it. And so the question is, if this is good enough, assuming that this gets implemented, is this good enough such that we don't need to implement inline parameters with your Bicep param file?
Yeah, exactly. Thanks, Alex. Looks like pretty positive responses compared to the previous one. Possible to have a variable file. Default naming convention. Sorry, Alex, were you going to say something? I think this is something that we are currently working on, being able to provide variables for Bicep params.
Chris, can you maybe elaborate a little further on why there are two different use cases?
Well, I could see, again, I'm drooling all over the hierarchy because that's what we do with our Terra Grunt deploys, and I want to duplicate that with all of this stuff. So being able to say, here's my Bicep parameter and traverse a tree upwards to get all your includes, that's a great way to deal with this. It allows for a single Bicep code template being deployed across multiple environments, multiple regions. I think that's beautiful. The command line, I think it's a completely different scenario where you're really talking about deploying something that you don't necessarily are going to have in a tree, but it's a much more interactive kind of deployment where we're going through and we're saying, here's a one-off, and oh, by the way, I want to use that new Antarctica region.
Got it. So in that case, you still want to override. A parameter was defined in the Bicep param file, but you want to override it. But you think it's overkill to create a new Bicep param file, import the other file, and then change the value in that file. You'd rather just do it on the command line?
Correct.
Okay. Are there others who share the sentiment that Chris has? See, Arnor agrees with it.
Okay. Sounds like it's a lot of people who share the same sentiment. So we'll go back and have some discussions internally about this and keep you guys updated. But that being said, I think we've kind of exhausted this discussion and we have a couple more topics. So I'm going to go ahead and go back to our PowerPoint. That's okay with everyone. Our next one is compile time custom imports. Something I discussed a little bit before during the 0.20 release. Johnny, do you want to give a quick demo?
Sure. Let me just share, and this will be as fast as possible. Okay. Can everybody see Visual Studio code?
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay, great. All right. So just some setup here. Compile time imports. They're going to be under a feature flag, and it's part of the user defined types feature for now. So where I set up this demo, there's a Bicep config with both of those feature flags enabled. So we turn on user defined types, we turn on compile time imports. Another couple of things about this setup, we have one Bicep file that has two types defined. And you can see they both have this export decorator. And there's also a JSON file. Shouldn't be writing this by hand, but like it might be compiled from a different Bicep file and published to a module registry. So we have the JSON file and the Bicep file in our system. So when we fire up main.bicep and we start to write, you can pull in imports from those files. Let's see. So from mod.bicep, we can pull in symbols individually by name, or alternatively, you can import the whole file, which will just give you access to everything that's defined in it. So now you can just use foo-bar and any properties of mod, any of those types, as if they were defined in this template where your import statement is included. So say type foo alias equals foo. And we can get some information about that through hovers, and you can see the same thing happening if if we use a property of this wildcard import namespace. Okay, so one question that I saw come up immediately is, can you do conditional imports? The answer is no. Everything that, or every import statement is getting processed at compile time, so it can't be conditional on a runtime value. In theory, we might be able to make it conditional on a compile time constant value, although that's not going to be part of what's included in the next release.
And Johnny, I mean, in this example, you're redefining the types in this file, but I could just use the types directly, right? I could say param, whatever, foo.
Yes. So we could have foo param of type foo. And then if you were to look at the compiled output, all the types we've imported, they get redefined here. They're part of the compiled output so that there's only one artifact that's going to ARM. And our parameters can refer to those things that we imported. Okay, this is a very short demo. And that's all I've got. I see we're close to time, so I'm going to hand back to Stephanie and answer questions in the chat.
Thanks, Johnny. Yeah, we only have a couple minutes left, but we do have some requested updates. We can see how quickly we can get through these. Alex?
Okay, so the first one, the what if issue is a reference to basically if you use modules in Bicep, what if doesn't really work. We have 2 engineers that are partnering with us that have started on this. So our goal was to get to it as part of the semester of work, at least to start it. So we have started it, and we intend to solve it as much as we can, but we'll keep you updated as they start to dig into it. IntelliSense for private container registries. So we have a dependency in order to enable this. The ACR team has this like metadata service that they are creating that just released to private preview. So once that's available in public preview, which I don't think they have an ETA for yet, we'll be able to light up completions for private container registries, just like with public the public registry or MCR. So good progress on that. We'll start wiring things up just to make sure things are working as expected. So I can't imagine that's too far away, but we'll see. Private networking for deployment scripts, we're in the late stages of getting this done. Our plan is to provide a new ETA in the GitHub issue for this, but it seems like it's 1 to 2 months out based on how things are going, but we'll see. Simplifying resource referencing. So there's an issue that has been long-standing. I think it's 2245 and 2246. Our plan is to implement that as part of the semester of work as well. I mean, it might get delayed a little bit, but for the cases that are being described where you don't want to kind of reestablish a reference to a resource via an existing resource, or you have a resource ID that you want to use directly and don't want to have to create an existing resource for that. This should meet those needs, but we have some work to do to get this done. So we'll see once we get further along on this if it meets all the requirements that people have. And then the last one, Bicep language support in Teams. This would be nice. We don't have any work started on this. I don't even know where to start, but we can try to figure out who owns this sort of thing in Teams and see what needs to be enabled. Usually they need some grammar file or something, and we have like what seems to be like 27 different versions of our grammar file for DevOps and GitHub and everything in between. So they probably just need one of those, and then we can light it up, but we need to communicate with them. So thank you for putting it on our radar, and we'll see where that goes. Any questions about the requested updates? Okay, cool.
We are at time, so I think if there's any other last minute questions, put them in chat and we can answer them. But otherwise, I'll end it here. So thanks everyone for coming, and we really appreciate you all showing up and giving us feedback and always being so active in chat. Thanks everyone.
Thank you. Bye all.